Hey everyone, welcome back. Let me ask you a quick question. How much do you really know about funeral services? Do you know your actual rights when it comes time to handle a death and that process, what that looks like, what to be on the lookout for? Well, today's guest is David Brazeau from the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, also known as the BAO. David's here to talk about everything as it comes to consumer protection in the death care sector, and he gives us a few fun facts along the way. As part of our ongoing partnership with the Legacy Expo, he also touches on ways to make informed decisions about funeral services. I'm excited for you to give this one a listen, so let's jump in. David, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Maria. Thanks for inviting us.
To get us started, can you let us know a little bit about who you are and also what the BAO is all about?
Sure. I'm a former journalist turned communications manager professional for several organizations during my working life. And, I'm always looking to do something that fits my interests. So working in the public interest with the BAO is a really good fit for me because as a reporter, going way back in my career, I was a reporter for about 12 years for daily newspapers. And, reaching the public with information that's valuable to them was always important to me. So that's been consistent. And at the BAO, we're all about making information available to the public and looking out for their interests in the bereavement sector, as we call it. I should mention that sector is funeral homes, cemeteries, crematoriums, alkaline hydrolysis facilities, and any salespeople we also license at those facilities as well. Alkaline hydrolysis is a chemical process, by the way, to decompose a deceased person's body. Most people would know that, but it's one of the options that are out there for people. And so, sharing information like that is valuable to me just as a professional, but to families as well. So that's sort of what drew me to it.
And we have an episode on alkaline hydrolysis, and listeners, you know this as aquamation, but the official term is alkaline hydrolysis.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, aquamation is sort of the commercial name that a lot of operators use. Some of them have different terms too, but that's what it is. It's a chemical process to decompose a body, and sometimes it's likened to cremation, but of course one is chemical and the other is flame. So a different process, but one that's an alternative to burial, and really not a new alternative anymore. It's been around for a handful of years now in Ontario.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of going and visiting a place that was providing the service to a family and being able to see the process of setting up. It was super fascinating, just like the science behind it. So super, super cool.
Yeah, they have that vessel. It's like a large tube. It looks like something from a science fiction movie from late 60s or 70s or something. But of course, it is very modern because we are in that future now. And it's something that people have turned to. It isn't nearly as sought after as some of the other more traditional forms of decomposing a body or your final resting place. But it is an interesting option, and it's one that fits some of the things that people are looking for these days that we can talk to a bit later. Yeah. You asked me what the Bereavement Authority is all about, so I should address that, hit that nail on the head. So we're all about consumer protection. We look out for the public's interest. And that comes in the form of information sharing, like we've been talking about just now, and also in the form of oversight. So that can be doing inspections. We have inspectors who go to these facilities and make sure that they comply with the law and regulations. And it can even be on the side of dealing with issues where people aren't complying with the law and aren't being respectful of people's rights or options, and just especially at that time in their lives when they're so vulnerable. So we have that side to what we do as well. It thankfully is a minimal part of what we do because the sector is by and large very, very professional, and they take great pride in their work.
And you mentioned that you were formerly a journalist, so you were in this realm of communications for quite some time. And based off of your career, you have both been in the private and public sectors. What drew you to join the BOA and also specialize in communications?
Well, coming to the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, like I said, was sort of a natural thing for me because it exists purely for serving the public interest. And really, that's the broader picture of what journalism is all about. But I've been in this space now, communications professional, for many, many years. And what drew me to it, though, was just that it's that thread that's sort of run through my career, if I look back at it, that I like providing information, anecdote stories, things that draw your attention to things I think people should know about and that they have the right to know about. Even the topics that people may not have great comfort in talking about. So I always say we're a hard sell at the BAO because we talk about death care.
I often say that's a hard sell, but it's 100% market when it comes to this stuff. So.
Yeah, eventually people do have to deal with the topic, of course. And often it's left to that very point in their lives when it's a must deal with. So we very much like to encourage people to get the knowledge up front when they're not in a time of crisis, when they're not in a time of grief, when they can think sort of, at some distance to, gee, what do I want when I die? Yeah. How do I want that to play out? And, if you think about that, talk about it with your family, then there's no mystery and there's a little less anxiety for your loved ones after you're gone. Or if you're dealing with someone else's funeral service arrangements and you don't know what they wanted, then you're the person with that anxiety, with that stress on you. So we want to make things as not just easy as possible for people, but also as informed, so their decisions can be informed and they truly do what they really wanted or what their family member wanted for their death care services.
And the BAO really plays that critical role when it comes to regulating the bereavement sector that you mentioned. What would you say are some key communication challenges that you face when it comes to uniquely regulating this type of environment?
Well, for us, Maria, it's about awareness. So that's the first foundational thing we need. We need people to be aware that they have rights and options and that we exist, which is not an unusual quandary for delegated authorities like us. So we're delegated by government to make sure the law is followed and that people's wishes are respected. And we do that in the bereavement sector that we're talking about. And most people don't know we're here, but they do, as we just talked about, come to realize we exist when they need us. And that's just as important, just as valid. And we want to be accessible in a public forum like this. Thank you for having me on your show. And we also do it digitally, which is a very big deal for us, being a smaller organization, so we can reach more people online, social media, video, all those sorts of different platforms. And then in person. So we like to speak at various public gatherings, conferences, or the Legacy Forum that's going to be occurring shortly. And it's our chance to just answer people's questions. And it's their opportunity to ask us those questions that maybe never comes up in just your day-to-day life until here you are in a state of grief dealing with something. So like I said, if people can think about those issues and those choices well in advance of when any of those matters are before them, then great. It's easier for them, and we want people to have some peace of mind before they have to make any decisions, and for their families to have the same opportunity.
And you said something really important, just mentioning the importance of awareness, like building on that awareness. And with that, I imagine comes an education play, making sure that the public is aware of these services, these regulations. How do you incorporate that type of education? And you mentioned that you're reaching out via digital and in-person means. What does education look like when it comes to addressing that public area?
Yeah, I mean, for us in my line of work, which is communications, it's always about alignment and repetition of messages in different platforms, different forums, both in and outside of the industry itself. So we're especially in my job in particular, public facing, and want just the general consumer, just want families and individuals to know what their rights are and what their options are. And so we want to reach them with a consistent set of information that really lets them know there is an authority out there who knows all about this industry, or this sector as we call it, and that we're here for them. We're here for them for information, to hear any complaints they may have with businesses or professionals that we license across the province, and we're here to enforce their consumer rights of being treated fairly and with respect in often very vulnerable times in their lives. So we do that on multiple platforms, and we do it with a communications plan that I write and vet through various people and colleagues here at the Bereavement Authority, and then implement across a whole lot of platforms and news and social media to make sure people can find us easily. And even if it's by accident, they read about us and go, "Oh, what are they about? Never heard of that." So curiosity is something I want to engage people with as well. And then they can come to us on all the different platforms we have. But the messaging, regardless of where they find us, on our website, social media, at a conference, at a consumer show, in a shopping mall, or anywhere like that, the messaging will be very consistent. We're here for you. We're here to help you, and we're here to guide you through the options you have, and then deal with any problems that might exist in terms of how you were treated or how you are being treated by the sector. That actually is a much smaller part of our role, but it takes up a big chunk of our time as well too, and not mine specifically, with those of inspectors and licensing officers and that kind of thing.
And if I can ask you if you can paint a little bit of a picture, like someone comes to you folks and identifies something, and then they're like, this was unjust or something along those lines. What's that process look like what does the support look like for the people that you're supporting?
Sure. So they might come to us with a complaint, and if they only know a little bit about us and they can see our website, you do a Google search and see our website, they'll contact us. They might email us, they might call us, because we do actually answer our phone live and in person. So we do that as well. And whatever their questions are, we'll answer them either on the spot, or we'll send them a reply later. We'll draw their attention to the free consumer information guide that's on our website and available at funeral homes and other bereavement sector organizations as well, free. And that information is written for the consumer, for families, so it's very easy to understand. If they have a complaint, we'll direct them to a web page we have where they can fill out a simple form describing the complaint and sending it to us, and we will reply to them with a response within 30 business days to make sure they know the status of their complaint, whatever's happened, whatever issue they may have had, and we'll explain that to them. And so that's sort of like the gateway in to us. By and large, people come to us just for information in general, what their options are and that kind of thing. They also do come to us for complaints about perhaps a business or something, or maybe they just couldn't understand something, and we help them with that as well.
When you're looking at specifically in this industry, like the element of storytelling, how does that play a role in the communication strategy that you're developing? And then are there any specific campaigns that you can speak of, or initiatives that you've done that really have a significant impact on the community or the industry that you noticed?
So educating the public is really important, and doing it in places where they're already physically going to, or going to digitally online, is where we make sure that access is easy to find. In addition to that, about 3 years ago, I introduced 2 new communications vehicles to the BAO. I joined the BAO in 2020. It was a pretty new organization at the time, having just started its operations in 2016. And we didn't have a public journal or magazine available to them yet, and we didn't have a licensee newsletter to the 9,600 businesses and professionals that we license across Ontario. And those are important vehicles that reach people in a very aligned and directed way as to what they want to know. So for licensees, as soon as we started that, and they already were hearing from us about various directives or various notices and things we wanted them to know from regular emails, but the newsletter itself was designed to package it up in a way that hopefully is more interesting to them. And it was well received instantly, really from day one. All 9,600 licensed professionals and businesses were reading it, and we can track that, thankfully. So we could see that everyone was reading it. But the harder piece for us was to reach people who don't want to talk about death. We know it's a value for them to know about the death care options out there, and burials and cemeteries and alkaline hydrolysis, like we were talking about, and all the different options they have to prepay or prearrange a funeral. You can prearrange your funeral plans free of charge, and just leave them with the funeral home, for example, no cost at all. And then that particular funeral home would have your plans right there with them for when the time comes. A lot of people don't know that. They think they may have to prepay, and many like to do that. And that's a good option, because it takes away some of the stress for the family if it's already said and done and even paid for. But people can also do it for free and just leave their plans there. So little nuggets of information like that are really valuable. And we sprinkle those nuggets on social media and then link it to more detail on our website, or link very often to the consumer information guide. So I thought, how else can we do that and get it to people in a way that isn't just good for us in reaching people in the way that we need to, but is good for them and is something they're interested in. So I developed a magazine. It's quarterly. It's all digital. It includes video and articles, and I named it Beyond. I wanted it to have a name that spoke beyond just our regulatory role and what we do in technical terms. Knowing again that we're a hard sell to the death care industry and it's death care regulations and services, and who wants to talk about that? Hey, I don't blame them. I understand it. I felt the same way myself. So I need to make sure we had articles that would draw people in, not just to the options and legislation and all these things that we take care of on behalf of the government. So I called on my reporter skills to develop articles that really informed people about the guide, the Consumer Information Guide, death care options, and about things we regulate and things we don't regulate but are adjacent to us, like dealing with grief or dealing in. So there are things called death cafes. That's what they're called. And you go, well, what's that about? And why would I want to go near it? And they're just a place for people to talk about. Sometimes it's about death care services. Other times it's just about how to deal with grief or how to open up the subject of death with your children or with young adults in your household. And death cafes have popped up, in London, Ontario, in Northern Ontario, in Toronto. And so we tapped into that as a way, again, to draw people into our magazine with something that's adjacent to what we do, but we don't regulate death cafes, of course, nothing to do with us directly. But it was a great way to start the conversation with people. Similarly, people have great interest in cemeteries, their historical significance, including the Underground Railroad, where cemeteries eventually were established by descendants of the original people who fled the United States in slavery to come to Canada and start new lives. And as the years went on and many of them died, cemeteries were formed in and by those communities. And some of them became abandoned to time, as many cemeteries do. Well, part of our job is to make sure those cemeteries are maintained and that they're licensed and that they're operated by someone. In many examples, municipalities become the licensed operators of those abandoned cemeteries. And it's a whole process. It takes time, but it really serves the community in a direct way. Sometimes just preservation of history and heritage, which is very important, especially to the Underground Railroad, but in particular, in general, for everyone. And so that, we've had a few good stories about the Underground Railroad and what it's meant to those communities, and the trials and tribulations of getting a cemetery license can take about 2 years when it's an abandoned cemetery, to go through all the processes, many of which are external to what we do, so environmental assessments and making sure access and roads are available. But then it comes to us for licensing, and then working with municipalities to become the operators of those cemeteries. So we give them all those sort of boring details, which are important, but also let them know that, hey, we're here to ensure that people's history, heritage, are treated with dignity and with respect, and that they are valued, and that those things are important to a community and its identity. So, some of the things can be pretty technical, and some of them can be really heartwarming as well, and serve Canadian and local history very well. So we use all of that as a way to draw people in to know that they have rights and options, and here are your rights and options, folks, and please read our Consumer Information Guide, all that kind of information. But we use the lever of interesting stories and interest the public have. For example, green burials, people great interest in the environment, of course, the last 20 years, and increasingly so as every year goes by. And so green burials is an interesting option that people are looking at these days. And what's interesting about that to me is that green burials is the way burials were always done 150 years ago. They're all green because, you didn't have the same sophisticated and almost industrialized approach to casket making and that kind of thing. It's very different. It was very earthy in terms of the degradation of the units that people were buried in. And there's been a return to that because there's a simplicity to it that people appreciate, and they like the notion of becoming a part of the earth after they're gone. So interesting little way to get people, again, interested in then reading about what their rights and options are. So, you get to draw on these things if you're an ex-reporter like me, and see how, you can bring people into the conversation and really bring them information that's valuable to them.
I'm so glad that you mentioned all of that. I feel like I have a million questions just about everything that you mentioned in that one little section. And I just also want to mention there's an organization called Radical Death Studies that talks about the intersections of death, dying, grief, what it looks like for Black communities versus Latin communities versus just other communities. And the fact that you mentioned, there's a lot of work that you folks are doing when it comes to preservation of history and heritage, and that identity piece is so key and so important when it comes to that storytelling element. Like, who are we as a people? Where did we come from? Where did we go? What did everything look like? So it's really lovely to hear that. That's part of, it sounds like, the mission of the organization as well.
Yeah, I guess, you could say that's the softer side in terms, we've got regulations and the law, hey, very important. It's the reason we're here. But the softer side, equally important. And things aren't necessarily carved in stone. So for people to understand who they are now, and many people have said this, they need to know where they've been or where their ancestors have been. And cemeteries are just a key part to that. I mean, there it is, a peaceful place to go. Learn about history, even if you're not in grief of any kind. It's just a terrific place to understand who we are.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And just the amount of history in graveyards, cemeteries, just everything, like who these people, these lives, these impact, and also just how people are buried also shows how they lived in a lot of ways too. So it's wonderful to hear that that's something that you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's so true.
My next question for you, I imagine there's a lot of broader public policy objectives when it comes to the type of work that you're doing. Can you speak to anything in regards to that and how you ensure that your communications align with the public policy that you're hoping to influence or adjust or change, or even just uphold?
Sure. So that's sort of communications 101, to have a communications plan for your organization. that aligns to its strategies, in this example, the law, our mandate with government, and our strategic plan. And so everything that I organize and that I write and develop for the BAO is according to the plan that's 100% aligned to our strategic plan and law. And so then I have to figure out, well, how do I reach people with all of this sort of dry stuff about their options and what they need to know about various services that are available to them on a subject that they don't want to hear about. So we've been talking about the magazine. That was one way to do it. And then, to bring some video into that as well to make it accessible. But you want to make that regulatory role that we have accessible and meaningful to people in their everyday life, because there's so many things competing with our attention, competing for our attention, that sometimes it's hard to get through the din of the everyday of information we all have to sift through and choose which we're going to pay the most attention to, week to week, month to month. So what I try to do is make the law, the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act, very real for people in terms of what it means for them. And what it means for them is that there is a law that respects your right to the funeral services that you want, and in accordance with provincial law. And we are here to make sure that it's enforced for you. Now, I probably wouldn't say it that way in a story, but that's the bottom line of what we do. We're here for you and your family. And that's how we say it to people. We tend to not just call them consumers, but we are a consumer protection organization. So we're here for you and your family, for information, complaints, and to enforce consumer rights and with respect to families and what needs to be put in place by the many different service providers out there. And, like we were talking about earlier, the biggest thing for us is awareness. So we need people to be aware of that. We need people to be aware that they can pre-plan, prepay for a funeral service and all of the services that stem from that, including burial, cremation, or alkaline hydrolysis. And we need them to know that they can do that for free as well. They can just plan it and leave it and forget about it. So we want death to be treated as a part of life. And that was what I did in sort of rebranding the BAO back in 2020 when I first joined. And previously, we had some documents that had great information in them, but they were dark and sort of foreboding. People are already feeling dark and sad and grief-stricken maybe when they first come to our website or to a document we have like the Consumer Information Guide. And so I thought, well, let's just show people a slice of life so that death can be seen as a part of life rather than it being seen as something entirely separate and distinct from life, which I argue it isn't. So I went with pictures showing people from many different cultures and many different walks of life. And it was a park, people walking through a park. So I got someone who's talented in graphic arts to go through that concept and put together sort of with our standby image that you see in many different documents. And it's exactly that, people walking through a public park. And the inference being death is just a part of that. And yes, it's hard and difficult, but deal with it in advance, and it might be just a little bit easier.
My comparison is that it's one coin and life is on one side and death is on the other. It's like it's balance. It is what it is. It's there. You can't have one without the other. They balance each other.
Yeah, that's a good image as well. Good metaphor.
Do you have any specific policies that come to mind pertaining to just bereavement leave in general that you are hoping to do advocacy for? Because I think right now folks are able to get 10 days unpaid leave as an example. Are there any type of advocacy or policy initiatives that you folks are focusing on or would want to focus on in the future?
Our focus is on bereavement care services, death care services provided by businesses and professionals. So we aren't actually on the grief side of things. We don't regulate that at all. So that's outside of what we do. We do talk about it in our consumer magazine and elsewhere, just because obviously those two things tie together so tightly. I think it's a natural for us, and we have been featuring a columnist who writes about grief in our magazine. But it isn't part of what we do.
And when it comes to just reflecting on your life and your career, you joined the organization back in 2020. Was it a specific pull for you? Did the opportunity just arise, or was there something about the organization that you were like, I have to join them now? And
Hmm.
and that since joining, what would you say you're most proud of accomplishing?
Well, that's a very good question. I guess, you know, why I joined them, as I was saying earlier, is because it fit with some of my communications goals and things I do in my personal life. And I I let my career and my personal life sort of mix together a little bit in terms of what I want to do. And so I brought that sort of drive to my work here at the BAO and thought, well, what do they need? And what do they need the most? So we talked about launching a new website, and rebranding it, making it very much a welcoming site, treating death and death care services and businesses as part of life. Um, One of the things I'm proudest of doing initially, especially, uh, was during COVID, the first year of COVID. So the restrictions came in March of 2020. Um, we needed a website, and everyone, including the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, were very busy in dealing with the safety precautions and changing precautions related to COVID and people's interactions, and the lockdown, and all those things. But I decided, sort of a little against what you might have thought, or what a person would have think would have been a good thing to take on during that, was to design a new website. So I wrote a plan, got some quotes, and put together a new website in 2020. It launched in September, because our old website was just that. It was starting to look old. It was starting to look like a site that people would have more difficult using, because it was. It was good in its time. And then, with such a small organization, we didn't have the attention to it that we have now. And so we launched that new site September 2020, and I thought, hey, this is great. This is sort of what we need now, and it did. People were drawn to it, and we've promoted it extensively on social media, and that worked for us. And we went from 200,000 page views per year to more than 725,000 page views only a year later in the pandemic. Now, sure, easy to get those numbers when everyone's interested, or more so in terms of changing restrictions at funerals. But we've been able to sustain that, and we're still up over 350,000 per year, 340, 350,000 page views per year, compared to 200,000 pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So, that's the thing you want to do in communications, is when there's a crisis, you want to make something good out of it, if you can. So there's lots more attention. The spotlight's never brighter than when there's a crisis that your organization is dealing with, and everyone was dealing with this anyway, being COVID, of course. So I kind of used that as an opportunity to get at least one good thing out of COVID, and that was that people would be aware of the services and rights they had, and that we, kept them up to date very much with the issue of the day, which was changing restrictions because of changes in COVID itself. And you might remember that people could only have 10 people at a funeral during the initial wave of COVID and the restrictions that came with it, that were necessary. So that was a huge thing to communicate to people and to the sector, and help them communicate that help all the funeral homes and cemeteries communicate about, these very tight restrictions, why they exist, and make sure that it was uniform across Ontario. So we did that, and we did it through a variety of ways. I was talking about social media, and we've used that successfully for a lot of different things. During COVID, it was key. We even had more than 2,000 people on a video call. I think it was on Good Friday in the first year of COVID. So, we had a great turnout, even though, that's a day when lots of people are not working. Well, our bereavement sector professionals, they were all working then and working very hard. So, we had great interest from the professionals. We had just as much great interest from the public. And we used that crisis to bring information to them that was valuable in the moment, but even long term. So more and more people know where to turn when they want information about death care services. So, that was very an issue very close to me, because we made the best use of communications technology and of some resourceful approaches to reach people and give them information that mattered to them. So we've used that as a way to move forward into a few other areas too that we've been talking about, Maria.
And it's a great website for folks who haven't checked it out yet. Truly, never let a crisis go wasted.
Yeah.
The website is really user friendly, really fantastic. So, fantastic job.
Thank you,
And
Maria. Yeah, it's thebao.ca, by the way. I should get that plug in there.
it'll also be included in the show notes. Don't worry. And you also mentioned some of your personal extracurricular activities that you do in your life. And I imagine this could be a mention to the community care Durham and trans care community support services that you volunteer with.
Yeah. Been with that. I was with an organization in Sudbury as well. They're all community care services organizations, support work for people in their communities, helping them live in their home, wherever home may be, longer and better before requiring an institution of some sort, perhaps like a nursing home or long-term care. So, I want people to live as best they can for as long as they can. So that's where my interest is in community care Durham, and that's what they're all about, is making life better for as many people as we can reach. So yeah, I'm on their board of directors, and we look at policy and we support staff in some of their decision making, and do all the things boards of directors do, provide some oversight, and then step back and let the professionals we employ do the work, and give us a direction as well. So that's been something that's really important to me and near and dear. And I did the same thing in Sudbury as well, at a community organization there, and TransCare Community Support Services in Scarborough, same thing. I was the chair of their board as well. Did that for about 6 or so years. And I've been with Community Care Durham as a board member for a little over a year now, a year and a half. And yeah, it's like my work, right? It feeds into things I like to do, things that I think are a meaningful way to spend your time. And so I enjoy that. And it does, just coincidentally really fit with my work at the BAO as well, and with the good people we have here.
Beautiful. And when you look to the future, imagine you have a crystal ball and you're looking into the crystal ball, what would you say are the goals for your role at the Bereavement Authority of Ontario? And what would you like to accomplish through the organization in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, I guess really what I want to do is stay on the road to making people aware of what we do and how to reach us and get the information that they need. And I'd like us to become the sort of authority that is very approachable for people and known, and one where we continue to just provide them with valuable services and information that they need to make among the toughest decisions of anyone's lifetime, either about their own death care wishes or about those of a family member who's passed away. So what I'm hoping to do is for us to have greater presence so that we can provide greater service to the public across the province.
And then my final question for you is, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, I guess I'm not really too concerned about that. I'm much more interested in what I'm doing now, and anything I can do to make my work more engaging, more valuable to people. That means something to me at work. And then, just hey, in my personal life, have fun. I mean, we're only here for a certain amount of time. Have some fun, people. I do like to mix the two together, in terms of just how I work, and I want to learn from people, keep learning from them, acknowledge any mistakes you make, and move on from there. So I'm trying to be mindful of those things as well.
Beautiful. Have fun. We're definitely having fun right now. So thank you for that. And your answer reminds me of someone else's whose response was, "It doesn't matter. I'll be dead." So
Yeah, that's a really good point. You won't know whatever your little legacy might be, and in the end, it doesn't matter. You can only have any impact while you're around. So after that, hey, if you're a famous person, maybe it matters to you. If you're a musician or a entertainment star of some kind, I don't have any of those worries. So, be your best self as much as you can. This is the one and only go round that we know of, that we each have. So make the most of it.
beautiful. And do you have any final thoughts? And let our listeners know how to get into contact with you or reach out.
Final thoughts, gee. Well, I've been thinking a lot about AI, so artificial intelligence, and I use it a little, not very much. Mostly my interest in it is understanding it. And I think it's going to be increasingly important for us to make sure the best of our humanity is reflected in the work and services we do every day. And what I think about technology and artificial intelligence is that it's valuable, but remember that it's artificial. And, I hope we can make sure that humans retain the public-facing roles that are essential to great services for people and really doing work of value for people. Let's use AI to take care of the sort of chores that need to be done, but make sure that we move those people into roles where humans are needed, and where we communicate with each other, especially in a business like bereavement, and one where that human connection is so important every day.
It's a whole other podcast episode. You left me on like a cliffhanger here. We need a part 2 for those.
Yeah, I'll have to make sure that we do something on your podcast, because you're one of those examples of a great story that's adjacent to what we do. We have nothing to do with your podcast, but I can see how it would be a really interesting piece for people to know about. Maybe we'll do it in a video, who knows, where they can learn about all the different things that you provide people, all the information you provide them on the grief and bereavement side of things, rather than just the regulatory world that we're in.
Something's brewing. Oh, I love it. This is great. David, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Pleasure, Maria. Have yourself a great day.
You too. Thank you. So, what did you think? Did David's insights into the world of funeral services and the role of the BAO give you any new perspectives or things to think about? When it comes to understanding your rights as a consumer, there's a lot to consider and keep in mind when it comes time to make informed decisions for end of life. If you're looking for more information or resources, be sure to check out the show notes for links to the BAO and other topics we covered here today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and connect with us online at Philotimo. That's PHILOTIMOLIFE. Thanks for listening, and until next time.